think that a lot of people think that having an experience like this is a magical blessing, and I suppose in a lot of ways it is, but it's not. It's also a huge burden. And any experiencer you talk to will tell you that, because, and especially at that time, it wasn't part of the national conversation, and I learned very early on not to speak about it, and I couldn't talk about this. It was huge, and I couldn't talk about it, and I needed to. And so I had packaged it up and put it away, and I continued on with my Christian development. I decided not to become a priest, but I became a fundamentalist Christian, and then I think somewhere in my early 20s, I read a magazine article about a near-death experience that was remarkably similar to mine. And I remember it just kind of gushing out, like this thing that I had crammed, and really didn't want to talk about it. It was too scary. It came gushing out, and then yet it was still decades before I never really processed it. And there's a big difference between, after it came gushing out, I could have told you the story, but I didn't process it, and that's a different thing. Psychologically, I don't know what that means. I'm not a psychologist, but I know that I needed to work through, and I needed to talk about it, and I had no format for doing that.
And I said, I just came home. I just found everything I had ever wanted in my whole life in connection. I've just experienced it. And he said, it's not your time. You cannot stay. And this was the first time I started to get more human, in that I started arguing with him and saying, you can't possibly send me back to a place that's so painful for me when I'm in so much bliss right now, right here with you. How can you possibly send me back? And he said, you have a child. You cannot stay. You must go back. You have a child. Now, I love my daughter more than life itself, or so I thought. But in that moment, she was not a consideration, in that very moment that I was fighting to stay. Now, in human form, I would lay down my life for her, but on the other side, I wasn't willing to give up that ecstasy and that bliss. And he kept repeating, you have a child. And as he's saying that, I'm starting to think to myself, okay, who's going to take care of her and love her the way I want her to be cared for and loved? Now, I'm divorced for a reason, so her dad isn't going to be the answer. My parents are both gone. My sister had some emotional issues that didn't make her an appropriate choice. Friends that I had, were they close enough? Did I believe in their abilities? And the answer was no. And in that instant, I was back in my body. Thinking about my child brought me back into my body. So I don't know if it was my heart saying, I choose her, or if it was them saying, you're going back. And I'll never know the full answer to that. I hope it was because my heart chose her. But coming back was a shock. Coming back into a body that I no longer fit into, because I had become this expanded being. And now I was relegated to this human, tight-skinned being again. And it was hard squeezing back in. It was hard feeling all of these emotions. It was hard, all the anxiety and dialogues rushing back. You know, we all have that mental chatter constantly. Well, on the other side, there's none of that. So you come from peace and quiet and love to, you know, being a human being in all of its foibles. And it's devastating. And it took me a long time to figure out, you know, what the gifts were in all of that. You know, I felt very punished at one point. I felt victimized because I had been sent back, so I thought. And it took time to process what I had experienced and what I was supposed to do with it. I didn't really have people to talk to about it. Who would understand? Couldn't go to my priest. I couldn't tell my doctor. You know, they would have thought I was certifiable.
And the first thing he said was, it's not your time, you have to go back. You still have a lot of work to do. And I knew that there's no way I wanted to leave that place. He said, you just had a baby boy, and you have a daughter at home, and you need to go home and raise them. That was my job at the time. That's what he needed me to do. And I didn't want to leave whatsoever. But I did what I was told. I mean, I didn't even realize where I was. I was 20 years old, and I don't think I'd ever heard of an NDE before. I don't think so. But I had no choice. I had absolutely no choice in his decision of what he was going to do with me. But it was all with love. There was nothing harmful, anything about it, even though I didn't want to come back here.
I then was taken to an area where it was shown to me the creation of the world. And this was shown in a way as if a giant tablet appeared in space and all the history of the world unfolded in me rapidly, yet I understood everything, and I was part of all things that had happened somehow. I was connected to this, and I could understand it. I could understand so many things so rapidly and completely that there is no way to explain this to anybody. And at some point, I realized I would have to go back. And I pleaded not to return. And I was told, well, you must return. And these beings around me of light indicated, you have to return. There's very important reasons. I don't recall what they said. I don't know what the reasons were. But the next thing that happened was very powerful to me and has always stayed with me, as has the whole experience. Although this sounds egotistical, I don't know how to say it other than what happened. Millions, or at least thousands of these light beings surrounded me and began to sing. And when I say sing, they were making music of a beauty that was improvisational and full and complete, like I've never heard in this world. And they were basically praising me and sending me back to do God's work. And at that point, the next memory I have, I woke up in a bathroom in this apartment I was at, and I began to look around for a razor blade to slice my wrist. Now this might sound very, very desperate, but it wasn't that sort of thing. I simply said to myself, I have to return. I want to return right now. I found a razor blade, and as I did, a voice very clear and distinct said, no. And at the second that voice happened, somebody said, I think he's in here, and the door opened, and I dropped the razor blade, and I went on with my life at that point. I went to my wife. She wasn't my wife, she was my girlfriend. She later became my wife. I was 17 at the time, and explained all of this. But I had no reference, nothing in life to compare it to. Remember, this was the early 70s, and so I really didn't have a perspective which I could place it in. Well, several years later, we had been married and had a baby, and I was in Denver, Colorado in the United States Air Force when I was watching TV during the day with my wife, and a person came on a show who was Dr. Melvin Morse, and I want to say it was like the Michael Douglas show, one of these daytime shows, and he began to talk about a book he wrote, Life After Life. And as he talked about it, I jumped up and I yelled, that's what happened to me. Finally, there was somebody who documented what had happened to me, and I realized it had happened to other people. Well, now in this year, there are obviously hundreds of thousands of these documented cases, of which I am just one. But that experience was a pivotal experience in my life, and it really took me many years to incorporate it into my life fully, and I, in many ways I don't think I have. I'd like to say I went on to become a fantastic person and a great spirit in this world, but I really don't believe that's the case at all. I have so much work to do in that arena, I think, but it happened.
That love is more powerful than, and I never took drugs, but in high school did marijuana, but there's nothing like it. I mean, it's such a magnet. And with me not wanting to leave, what happened was he made me. I had no choice. All of a sudden, after seeing him on that wagon, which I wanted more than anything in this world, because I knew if I got on that wagon, I would get to go where he's going, which is to God, to heaven. But because he said it's not your time, you still have a lot of work to do. And he also told me that I have to tell people what happened. He goes, I want you to tell everybody you see about this experience. Well, he kicks me out, kicks me back down here. And I end up in the waiting room, or I'm sorry, the recovery room in surgery. And the pain was horrible. It wasn't because of the surgery, although I had had surgery before, it was different. It was like my body went to this ugly thing I didn't want to be in. I didn't want to be in the body. I didn't. I was pissed, I was mad, and I had depression that lasted for a couple years. The fact that I would have left my newborn baby and my daughter here is something I was ashamed of for a long time. So even though he told me I had to come back and tell people about it, I couldn't do it because I was ashamed. And as I found out from other NDEs, that is common to feel shame and humiliation that you would have done that. But the draw, the strength of being there is overpowering. It's like you can't control it. I did what I was told because I had no choice, but if he had given me a choice, I would have stayed there. I hate to admit it, but I would if I would have left everything here. I didn't care about my body. I didn't care about my family. And not without love. It wasn't about that. It was that I wanted to be where this man was. I wanted to be to God and to go to heaven. Because what I saw there was, beautiful is not a strong, I don't know. It was so intensely wonderful, powerful, everything you think it is and more. But yeah, when I got back to my body and the pain set in, like, this isn't right, I'm not supposed to be in this body. I knew something was not right, even though it was. But to me, because I didn't want to be here, that's what it felt like.
And you said that you couldn't really remember much from when you were 9, but you remember this near-death experience rather vividly. As you related it to us just a moment ago, were you reliving it?
As I was relating it to you, yes. That's why I close my eyes a lot. I can go right back there when I close my eyes. So yes, in some ways, I was reliving it. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So when you came back to your body, what was that like? When you sort of exited the near-death experience and returned to your body, what was that like?
It was not pleasant. It was, matter of fact, gross is probably a good word would be gross. It was like going from this absolute freedom to getting like stuffed into my body. It was like putting on an old crusty pair of socks or something. Mm-hmm. And I was in terrible pain. And so it was very, very uncomfortable.
But yeah, I was depressed because of it for a couple of years. I could recall that moment every day for years. And that love, I could bring it back because it doesn't exist here. That kind of love, we're not capable. We're just not as human race. It just doesn't exist here. I don't know if that's our own fault or not, but it's the way it is. But after a couple of years, and I had to shake this off because that's all I thought about, knowing what's there and what's here. You don't want to come back, like Gigi said, you don't. it's so wonderful, pain-free, perfect there. And then to come back here to this chaos, you don't want to. You realize you get to leave all that when you actually, all of us are going to pass away and all of us are going to die at some point. So when you do get there, it's different. It's this whole other thing, and you're not going to want to leave. It's wonderful and it's beautiful.
And as I looked up, there was a tunnel, a light, an opening, and it was glowing. And around that opening were many people milling around. And it seemed to be one man kind of taking a turn at being in charge. And I could see that they were talking, and some noticed that I was coming. And there was concern among them. And they talked to this man, and he looked and saw me coming. And the next thing I knew, he floated up next to me. It's like I was coming this way, and he came right here. And we were both floating in this space. And it was so wonderful. It was so loving and calm and peaceful. It was wonderful. And he looked down at me, and he had a clipboard, and he looked like he was in street clothes, like a vest sweater, and just kind of a regular kind of guy. And I knew him as Uncle. And I remember thinking, I don't have an uncle that looks like him. And he looked down at me and he said, "You're not supposed to be here. It's not time for you to be here." And I remember looking up at him and saying, "But I want to be here." And I had no conscious thoughts of where I'd come from or anything. I mean, it wasn't a matter of getting away or in lieu of. It was just, with all my heart, I wanted to be there. I wanted to come. I wanted to go home. And I was happy. And he took a pause, and he kind of, you could see him thinking about something and deciding whether to say something next. And with that, my memory, there was a picture placed in my head of a memory of my original agreement of why I had come to Earth to begin with. And it was like I remembered, and I went, "Oh, right, right." I think one of the things that I've thought about greatly is that one of the things that bothers me so tremendously about the metaphysical movement, in lieu of my experience, and in lieu of what I was shown, which I think, if there's any message that I can give, it's not about meditating and leaving your body and taking your light being out of this earth. Indeed not. It is about bringing the light into this earth. Stay here. Be an anchor. Let the light come in through you into this world. Don't abandon this world. We need you. We need you here. We need you to be present. And we need you to be open with an open heart.
Then the light itself, this infinite light, spoke to me. And it said, I've heard this said all weekend, and I thought it was really unique. It said, "This is not your time, you must return." Man, I said, no way. And I argued, and I perceived this light to be God. So I argued with God. And I said, no, I've got a family here I never knew. I'm feeling loved like I've never felt I was loved. I mean, I never knew when we're walking this life that we're loved. I mean, we are loved. I never knew that. And I didn't want to go back to that separation. I didn't want to go back to that body. And that body I knew was still in the ocean, being tumbled and tossed, was very broken, And it was just cold. It was not something I wanted. Cold and confining. I didn't want to go back to that. I thought I presented a pretty good case. You can see I'm here. The light spoke one more time and said, no, you must return. You have a purpose. Oh, man, that word, purpose, just, went into my being. And when you're in that light, you're connected to this consciousness that's so much more than just yourself. You're connected. To me, it felt like you're connected to all the souls that ever were and all the souls that ever will be. And so you have this immense knowing. And I understood that purpose. And with understanding, I found myself outside my body. And I won't go into the details because I really do want to keep this on time because there's a lot I want to talk about. But there was a bit of a miraculous resuscitation, you might say, where my body was slammed up against some wreckage and it pushed the water out of my lungs. And there were three of my soul family that originally greeted me were with me. And when this water was pushed out of my lungs, they pushed me back into my body. And I took my first breath. Man, I wish I looked that good. When you come back, the light lingers. It stays with you. For me, it stayed with me for about 3 days. I felt like I was half here and half there. But this experience rocked my world. I was an engineer. I saw things in black and white. This was something just totally different. I did not know how to deal with this experience. I tried to share it with my family, and at the time, I got a very bad response. I didn't feel like I could talk to them about my experience. And the world I lived in was, we did underwater exploration. And back in the 80s, it was so dangerous, we couldn't even be insured. Lloyd's wouldn't even insure us. Our company used to have to take a bond out on each and every one of our lives because the work we did was so dangerous. So we put each other's lives in each other's hands every day that we were on the job. So death was a taboo subject. So I felt absolutely isolated and alone. I had no one to talk to about this. And I wanted my old life back. And all the time, I'm thinking, God, I was in that light, and I understood this purpose. Purpose. Now I'm here. What is this purpose? So I wasn't a real happy camper. But, so what I did, what I thought, the healthiest thing I thought I could do for myself was, divers, we like duct tape, So I thought I would take the light, the soul family, nobody talks to God. I'm going to put all that into a box. And I'm going to duct tape that baby closed. I'm going to take out some magic markers and I'm going to write all over it, do not touch. And I'm going to put it as far back in my brain and in my memory as I possibly can, never to ever, ever be touched again. Yeah, like that was going to work, right? There were some things that I could deal with, my little engineer brain could deal with right off the bat. And I called it acceptance, tolerance, and truth. Because after having that in-depth life review, I suddenly knew who I was. And that's quite an accomplishment for a guy at 26, I thought. I knew who I was. And I could accept, yeah, I've got a lot of issues, but I can work on myself. I can be better. And then tolerance. Before this experience, like I said, I used to cut my swath through life. And tolerance was not in my vocabulary. And suddenly I saw, because of this life review and because of the love that I experienced, that, we cross paths all the time with people that we may not understand or life situations, We may be in a life situation that we're not tolerant of, but it's only temporary. And that we can change. And that we may not understand where another person is coming from, but we can be tolerant. And then the other one was truth. As an engineer, I used to see truth as hard and cold facts. It's the way I lived my life, was through logic and reason. Well, suddenly I have this new perception of truth. It was a little hard for my engineer brain to get it wrap around it, but I saw that we all have individual truths. And that our heart recognizes when we walk across or we come in contact with our personal truths.
And this time, God had told me to look to my left. And I looked down to my left, and all of a sudden appeared in front of me Earth. And I'm watching and I'm looking at Earth, and all of a sudden I'm noticing something strange about it. And I pay attention, I look a little bit closer, and I see that the Earth was engulfed in flames everywhere, all over the planet, flames. And I began to panic because it was the first moment that I thought about my family. And I looked down and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my kids are down there. You know, my family, my husband, my parents, my sister. And I was panicking because there's these flames. And I looked at God and he was on my right. And all of a sudden I knew to look down in front of me again. And again appeared those glasses. Now the first time I had put the glasses on, I could see what I didn't see before. And already knowing that I'm seeing flames without glasses, I didn't want to put them on. I didn't want to see what I hadn't seen. I was afraid. But it didn't matter. As soon as I saw the glasses again, they were coming on me, and I felt my hands drawing them to my face, and I put them on, and as soon as they were on my face, I found myself looking. And God and I together looked again this time. And this time, I looked, and all between each and every one of the flames all over the planet were these silvery white things lifting off. And I'm looking and I'm focusing, and I noticed, oh my gosh, those are souls. Those are people. And they're fine, they're unscathed, they're lifting off in between the flames unscathed. And they were coming up behind us and going into the planet, which was heaven. And I was so excited, I was so relieved, and I said, oh my gosh, God, look, they're fine, they're okay. And all of a sudden, I was so happy, I was so joyful, but at the same time, this was the very first time in my whole experience with God that I felt this incredible magnitude of sadness from God. And I said, no, look, God, it's okay, they're not hurt. And he looked at me and he said, Erica, it's free will. And I didn't understand what that meant at first, because to me, everybody was fine. But he was crying for the ones that chose the separation from him. And I understood in that very moment how much God loves each and every one of us and wants that connection with each and every one of us. But he loves us so much that he lets us have that choice to have that connection. And then it was time for me to go. And I told God I didn't want to go. I couldn't imagine. I knew that I was home. And I had no desire to go back. Even though my family was there, I knew at the same time they would be fine. Everything would be okay. And God said, child, you're not staying. You work for me now, remember? And he said, before you go, I want to give you 2 more gifts. He said, I want you to take the gift of patience and beauty, and now I'm going to give you knowledge and wisdom. And I want you to be quiet and listen to the people that I put into your life. And then when you speak, you will change millions of people's lives. And there was no arguing. He sent me back with that.
I had never recalled ever feeling so light before and so liberated. The fear was gone, the fear of the cancer, the pain. I had suffered for 4 years in discomfort. It was all gone. There was no reason to go back to that physical body. Not only had I been suffering, but my family had been suffering, caring for me. And I just couldn't see a single reason to go back. But it was in that moment that it seemed my Father impressed upon me that it's not your time. You need to go back. There are still some gifts for you. And I felt as though I didn't quite understand at first, because what I felt was, what is the point of going back to a sick body? But also it seemed that in the same instant, it was as though I had this vision of clarity, or like I had entered another dimension. And this other dimension or realm was like I had this feeling of incredible clarity, where suddenly everything made sense. And I understood. I understood why I had the cancer. I understood how everything in my life had led me to that point in time where I was lying there dying on that hospital bed. I understood also that we are amazing, magnificent, powerful beings, because I felt my energy, my essence was so huge and powerful and amazing, powerful beyond my imagination, beyond anything I could ever have known before. And I realized that I had never known this. It was the first time that I knew this. And then I realized that now that I knew what I knew, if I go back into my body, my cancer was going to heal. And it was at that moment that my Father impressed upon me, now that you know the truth, go back and live your life fearlessly. And it was at that time that I started to open my eyes and come out of the coma.
And so we were going down this pathway, and I knew that this, and I don't really have the words to describe it, of course, but this great dome structure of sorts was really the point of no return. And I could hardly wait, because I wasn't going back. So, running, like, come on guys, let's go. And one of the guys who was doing CPR was a young man at the time. He was 18, and he kept calling to me to come back, which I might add is exactly opposite of what you're taught to do during emergency resuscitations. Really in training, you're taught to just divorce yourself from the individual. You just go through the protocols, you keep doing them until they either work or don't. But he was never able to do that. And he kept calling to me to come back and take a breath. And calling and calling and calling. And I would look back, and he was kind of a fluffy guy. A very soft, vulnerable kind of a kid. And I would look back, and eventually I would just think, okay. And I would say, okay, hang on, I'll be right back. And I would go back down to the river, and I would quickly lie down, take a breath, and then immediately I'd be back with these people. And then he would start calling, and I would look back and I'd think, oh my gosh, really? Okay. And I would go back and take a breath. And this cycle went on a number of times. And it was interesting to talk to him later, because I was really irritated. And it was interesting to talk to him because he was really irritated, because I would take a breath and then stop. And then eventually I would take a breath. And I joked afterwards, I said, well, you only asked for one breath. I told you several times now, I am a concrete thinking person. If you ask me for a breath, I interpret that as one. So eventually we did get a little bit further down, and we eventually arrived at this threshold, and I could see other angels, people, I'm not sure what to call them, inside, and everyone was very busy, and everyone was so overjoyed to welcome my arrival. And it was amazing because, again, it wasn't me. I knew that that same sense of joy occurred when every person showed up. It was this remarkable recognition, because there's so many of us, and a lot of people die every day. But it was clear that every single soul actually makes a difference. And I was on this threshold for what seemed like, of course, many, many hours. And I, like so many of you, felt that I had complete understanding. I understood how it all worked. I listened to a gal's talk yesterday who said something that I thought, oh my gosh, that's it. She had the same experience. Because she said it all made sense. Everything was in order. And I would say that that was part of my experience. All I had to do was think about a question, and it all made sense. I understood how it worked. And it was remarkable for me in many aspects, one of which was understanding, although of course I can't verbalize it, but truly understanding how it can be true that God actually knows each and every one of us, loves each and every one of us as though we're the only ones, and has a plan for each and every one of our lives that's wonderful. And that was really, not that the rest of it wasn't profound, but this was a very profound understanding for me, because it's something with which I had struggled before this experience. There are billions of us on the planet. I mean, you look around this room, it's pretty difficult to even know everyone in a given room. It's very difficult to know the people in your neighborhood, to love them, to accept them, despite the fact that you don't like them. They don't look like you, they don't agree with you, whatever the reason. Our general approach is exclusionary. You know, we like only who we like, and they get to be in our club and no one else does. But to realize that God loves each and every one of us more intensely than we have any ability to understand or comprehend, and has a plan for each one of us. I mean, that's incredible. The topic of this conference, hope, healing, and life transformations. If that isn't something for which to be hopeful, there's nothing. I mean, the idea that God knows me and loves me more than I can appreciate it. You know, the Bible says that nothing can come between us and God's love, but I would disagree with that. I think the one thing that can come between that is us. I don't feel worthy of that love. I don't understand that love, and so I can't accept it. So, you know, I was on this threshold, and we're having a great time. And then, of course, the people, these angels, spirits, guides, whatever you want to call them, then told me that it wasn't my time, that I had more work to do on earth, and that I had to go back to this body that I'd already said goodbye to. And so I did what I thought was reasonable. I said, I'm good. No, you know, everything's fine. I'm not going back. I'm here. I lost that argument. I'm a doctor, not a lawyer. So I was very sad to then be taken back down this path. And at that time, as part of the conversation, I was told about some of the things I still had to do on Earth. And at that time, we had the first of a couple of conversations about some of those things, including the future death of my oldest son. And at that time, in the conversation, part of it, of course, was, well, what's that about? You know, why? And again, it went back to this life review that I'd had. And recognizing that mine and ours. Our position is not to ask why. Our responsibility is not to know the answer and to make that judgment of whether something is worth it or not. But our responsibility is to trust and to say, yes, God's will be done. And trust that there is beauty that will come of all things. And that there is hope in the plan for each person's life.
So then that was done, and I said, okay, well, what are we going to do now? And God said, well, you've got to go back. It's not your time yet. And I said, oh no, I'm staying here with you. I love it here. And God said, well, no, it's really not your time. You've got to go back. Oh no, I kept arguing. Oh no, I'm staying. I like it here. I'm never leaving. And God said, no, really, you've got to go back. And really, what about your family? And all that compassion I learned, well, where did it go? I said, oh, they'll be fine without me. Well, God said, let's see about that. And he directed my attention to look down, kind of off to the right, and it looked like clouds. And the clouds parted, and I could see down below, standing, were my father, mother, and my little brother. And I was allowed to feel what they would feel if they were told that I had died. And oh my gosh, there was no way I was going to let that happen. It was way beyond anything I wanted to be responsible for. So I just kind of jumped away and yelled out, no! And God said, okay. And I said, well, what will I do? He said, you will help me by showing love to people. And I kind of wish I would have asked for a manual or some kind of examples, because that I really, I was confounded by that for quite a number of years, trying to figure out how in the world was I going to show love to people? Do I go around hugging everybody I meet? Do I go out and get a big fancy degree from college and write some books and have who knows what? I don't know. I thought it had to be something big. Well, what I discovered was it doesn't have to be big at all. It's in all the everyday interactions with people, just to show kindness and love. Be a good listener, that sort of thing. It's really quite easy, and it makes you feel good too. So, with my funny personality, I guess, I did have a request from God, and I said, okay, but before I leave, could you do me a favor? And God said, sure. What? And I said, could we please go back together like when I first got here? God said, yeah. And so we merged back together in this big ball of loving light energy. And oh my gosh, just the incredible, unlimited, unconditional love feeling. And until I was filled up again, couldn't add any more. And then I was zapped back into my body. That was turning somersaults underwater. And I'm thinking, oh no, not this again. And so then, thankfully, I heard God's voice, which said, hold your breath a little while longer. And I did. And somebody on the shore reached in their arm and grabbed me and just yanked me out of the water. And I came out, coughing and all that expected kind of stuff when you're stuck underwater for who knows how long. I didn't have any memory of the experience yet. And I did not go back into the water. I just kind of stayed away from there. And I went back later on in the day with my friends to the apartment, and maybe we went out to eat or something, and we all kind of fell asleep all over the place on the couches and love seats and all that, like young people would do. And in the morning, when I was waking up, before I opened my eyes, there was this funny feeling like, oh my goodness, something happened in the water the day before. I don't know what, but something happened. And I was afraid to open my eyes, but of course I eventually did. And when I looked around at all these sleeping bodies in the room, I could see it was like their love energy aura. Everybody was glowing, and I just had tremendous love for everybody, and I felt like I wanted to go up to each one and tell them how loved they were, and that they were a child of God, and everything was about love with me. It was really, I didn't know what to make of it, because I still didn't have the memory of the experience, just this feeling. So I basically just walked around with the biggest smile on my face. I couldn't wait to get back home to my parents to tell them how much I loved and appreciated them for everything they had ever done for me. And of course, they said, "Where's our daughter?" And so anyway, I just basically went about my life being a more compassionate, kind person.
I started having some of the intuitive things you hear about people, some of the psychic things started happening. And I remember the very first one, I'll tell you about it. I was in the kitchen doing dishes, and my father was sitting at the table calling his friend on the phone, Bill. And I can only hear one side of the conversation. He says, "Hi, is Bill there?" And very clearly in my head, I heard, "No, he went hunting in Kern County." Now, I don't even know, I was 9 years, I didn't even know what a county was, let alone Kern County. And then the next thing my dad said was, "Bill's a hunter? I didn't know he had a cabin in Kern County." And then I knew I was possessed. And it frightened me so badly that I psychologically packaged it up, the whole thing, and I put it away, I crammed it. And I didn't process it. I just crammed it. And so it didn't exist.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, the church was an impediment to your authentic spiritual development.
Yes, I'd say that's a pretty good explanation, yes.
Yeah.
But I could see all these, I could see thought forms, I could see energy, I could see all kinds of things in the air. And that was part of my typical after effects. You know, it's the after effects. They're both physiological and psychological. You know, the near-death experience is not a light show with a storyline. It's not. There's more. And the after effects are both physiological and psychological. And it's the experience and the after effects. They're two halves of the same coin. And it's the after effects that validate the experience, not the other way around. So you're dealing with all these after effects, and some of them are puzzling and confrontive and different. People who are able to see energy in the air, they're able to see everything is breathing. That's one of the things that that I was able to do. The chair is breathing, the table is breathing, the wall is breathing, because I can see it moving. And everything is moving, except that we don't really see that. But science tells us that everything is moving, everything is vibrating, nothing is still. Well, after my experience, I can see that very clearly. I can see very clearly that everything is in movement. And I could see through people, you know, and that's a really heavy responsibility, because it's like, what do you do about that? And I learned to be very calm and very careful and very respectful around people, and not say anything, but maybe perhaps lead in very gentle ways, in mannerisms that might be able to help that individual, or invite that individual to think differently, or to enable that individual to, you know, maybe thinking in different ways, or having to deal with certain things in their life. I could very skills or techniques or mannerisms that might make a difference, or a word that might make a difference. And that's my life.
I came back with a weird sensitivity to light, and I hear people. The worst one I ever had was I was driving in the car, and it's the worst time it could have happened, but a face came at me, which happens a lot to me, and they smile. It's never anything bad, anything evil, nothing like that, and I don't know its purpose, but they will always smile at me, and it lasts for a couple seconds, and then I'll continue doing what I'm doing. Normally it hits me in the shower, I think, because I'm calm, I think, but this time it was in the car and not very safe because it blocks my vision. But that was new, you know, that didn't happen before, so I came back with that and the fact that I now feel people. So I can be around someone I don't even know, and if I pick up something ugly, I call it the ugly inside of people, I can't be around them because it makes me sick, it bothers me. I can physically feel it. That didn't happen before. I now have a problem with watches and electronics. I can wear cheap watches, they will work, but I can run out of watch battery in like a month or two, depending upon the metal on the watch, I think is why. I think my energy drains it, I'm not quite sure, but I read somewhere too that that's common also. So I couldn't explain it before. When I read it about another NDE or that they had that big problem, I was like, oh, okay, it's normal when they come back with that, so I have that too. That's why I wear this a lot. Because it's a watch, because it bugs me not to know the time, but I can, on this, and it doesn't affect this. But there's, the poor watch guy, he had replaced batteries in all my watches over and over, and he didn't charge me after that, and I said, you know, I can't bring it to him anymore because I knew it was me, not his battery watches. Yes, or watch batteries, I should say. So I stopped doing that. But the whole change coming back, you see everything different. You see people different. I am so not scared of so many things out there now. I'm like, you have no idea how much this is just not a big deal. And your perspective is just so different. And like JJ said, I work with people now with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, lots of physical and emotional situations, a lot of that with the elderly people. And that feels right for me to be there. Before I was in the court system for many years. And that sucked a lot of energy out of me because I was around so much negativity all the time. And it affected me really bad. I ended up with an ulcer and all that. But I get into the healthcare thing where I can help people, different story. And it feels right. And you can't help it. You just can't. You can't control the way you end up when you come back. There's no control over it. And when I tell people where I work about the situation, and I don't go around telling everybody because the thing is that when I did try to do that, a lot of people think it's evil. They say it's the devil. And I'm like, okay, I know it's not the devil, so whatever. So, you know, I do have to be careful who I tell the story to. But the people who I do tell and are receptive to the information, they are very interested and will ask me all sorts of things, what I saw, who I met, all this, what I was told. And so it helps people to tell that story. I mean, to know that when you die, it's not the end. It's just not. This is like one small stepping stone to after. This just is a tiny piece of it.
The love I felt in the other realm, it doesn't matter where or who it was coming from, because all of us have different philosophies of how we like to see life. I don't like to put labels on anything. So whether the love comes from Jesus or Allah or Krishna or Buddha, it doesn't matter. Whether it came from my father, it's all God. The love was still unconditional. And that love that I felt told me that I was deserving and I was worthy of being loved. And it made me realize that it's okay to love myself. Most of us don't know this while growing up. While we are children, We don't realize, or even as we grow up, when we're teenagers and in our 20s, we don't realize that it's okay to love ourselves. When we're born, we know it's okay to love ourselves. When we're born, we're happy little children. Look at babies. Babies are so full of themselves and they're so joyful. And then we spend a lifetime getting it conditioned out of us. And then halfway through our life, we then start reading self-help books and going to courses to bring it back into our lives, to find it again. So what I want to tell you is that really, if you loved yourself, so many of your problems and issues in life would actually be solved and healed. Now I want to just ask you, honestly speaking, before you embarked on a journey, on a self-searching journey or whatever journey, before you started reading books on spiritual things, say when you were much younger, were you ever taught that it's important to love yourself? I want a show of hands. How many of you were actually taught that it is important to love yourself? Okay, a few of you. But literally, I think I can count maybe 5 hands. Now here's what happens when you love yourself. When you love yourself and you fill yourself up, you have a lot more to give other people, because you cannot give people what you yourself don't have. When you give and give and give, but you're empty inside, and you just keep giving because maybe for some reason you've learned that it's selfish to love yourself, it's selfish to give yourself, and it's selfless to give. You've got to be loving, you've got to keep being generous with your love and doing for other people, and you keep doing and doing and doing, and then imagine that you become drained, which is very common, which is what I did. I became drained to the point I got cancer. Now imagine you start to become drained and tired of giving, and you realize that people aren't giving back to you. And now you feeling a little bit needy, like you need some support, but it's not coming back to you. What do you feel? You feel resentment towards the people you've been giving and giving who aren't giving back to you. And when you feel resentment for them, what happens is that it makes your love for them conditional. And that is the start of a dysfunctional relationship. And that's why we have so many relationships that are breaking down. Now, you imagine if you allow yourself to fulfill yourself, you allow yourself to love yourself enough that you allow yourself to find your joy. Now, people who love themselves, who allow themselves to find their joy and feel joyful about life, are the most fun and generous people to be around. And when you love yourself to the point where you are feeling fulfilled, self-actualized, then the love that comes from you is unconditional because you don't need anything back from anybody. The love you give is pure and unconditional. And that is the most important lesson I learned.
True learning happens in the body. And this is a big deal to me personally because so much of my life was about wanting to escape the body and wanting that for other people. And I also grew up hearing, you know, when you die, you get to, you know, take off that glove and you get to, you know, be free. And so I kind of thought like here is the more negative, there the more positive. And with this understanding in this place that the body is, in a way, there, as hard as it is to see and understand, true learning happens within the body, because when we are in experience in this form, there's something that evolves within us, that can evolve within us at soul level, that makes the body an important part of the whole, that it, you know, that it isn't one's good and one's bad, but that the two work together in an important way. So that was very healing for me personally, to come to a better understanding of the body. I at one point was moving to another area, and there was another man in this cross point, and I just knew for some reason that he also was someone who was similar to like a mentor or like a type of teacher or something. And I remember suddenly becoming excited, like I know what I want to ask, because I come from a background where it was a lot of this is what it is, and it's not that, and this is what's true, and this isn't, or this is the one that's the right one, and those don't have it all, and things like that. So I was like, well, here it is. I want to ask, and I kind of went up, and I didn't even have to ask, because the question that was there in my mind, well, which one is the true church? It was already in his understanding that it was in my mind. And at the same time that I was feeling this question, I was in his place, seeing myself from his wisdom and knowledge and background. And the way I saw myself asking was like a little kid who goes up to someone with maybe some more wisdom or knowledge. And it was as if I were saying, so tell me, which kind of cheese is the moon made of? Is it Jack, Swiss, or cheddar? And it was, he didn't answer me with words or even with that telepathic communication. He smiled at me, and he just kind of lowered his head in a way that I understood he was going to let me wait a while, whatever a while means, until I was ready to figure out what it was I really needed to ask. And ever since then, when I've come back in prayer, meditation, I've always kept that in mind, that keep in mind, Amy, you may not be asking the question you mean to ask, or you may not be there quite yet. So I give myself a little extra time once in a while, and I do sometimes realize when I'm in meditation, this isn't the question, and I don't even know what it is yet, but I'll sometimes realize that. So that's just a little note on something that was interesting.
But all those denominations or religions on this side of reality that we try to put into constructions of thought, it's lost its importance to me.
Irgendwie in Denkgebäude zu fassen, das hat für mich an Wichtigkeit verloren.
I had already believed it before, but I hadn't experienced that this faith is true. But if I'd compare this with an image, this experience demonstrates that everything is a lot bigger, a lot vaster, a lot more universal, and that it affects all of us.
Viel weiter, viel universeller und uns alle angehend ist. Und
it's probably just very little. Can I say it like that? But I don't want to be too cautious. I'll just say it. Faith is a crutch for this side of the world. It helps us to walk. For me, it's the Christian belief system, whether it is Catholic or Lutheran. Well, I believe these two denominations have so many common features and not many proper differences anyway. They never played a big role to me anyway. Faith is just a walking aid, and I won't need this walking aid anymore. This crutch. That's what I connect with in this experience. And I probably wouldn't have been able to live in the same way, and I may not have been able to accept it in the same way if I hadn't had this accident.
We're all here to learn. We're all here to do better and be better. How you treat others and stuff. Oh, and there's no religion. That's the other thing. If you go there, there's no religion. There's no priest, there's no rabbi, there's no bishop, there's nothing. It does not matter. Nothing. So when I hear someone say, well, you're going to hell because you're not this and this, I'm like, trust me, you're in such a surprise when you get there. Because it's so not relevant. It's just not relevant. And the important thing is that you learn, however you learn about God and being a better person, however you get that experience, that information is good. Right, but there's no right or wrong religion at all. So long as you're a good person, you know, are following God and all that, that's what matters. It doesn't matter how you get there, but no, you're not going to go there and see a priest and a rabbi and all that. No, not at all. It's so just not part of the process at all, at all.
You see, what was so huge with that was that he and my mother were so very, very close. She was closest to him. So that was huge, getting to see her. But the other thing was, we were told when we were little kids, if you committed suicide, you went to hell. Well, number one, I don't believe in hell as what we were taught as a child anymore. And number two, it gave my brother the realization that his friend did not go to a horrible place. Because that was one of the reasons why my brother was so concerned about dying. Am I good enough? I've lived a rough life. Who will take me in? Who will speak for me? And he had peace. He died a year later.
Oh, and that's right, the other thing I was told was that because it's not my time, there's no cheating. The interpretation is no suicide. You are cheating if you do that. He didn't say it was a sin or a crime. I'm not saying that I know if it is or it isn't because I don't. But he said no cheating about that part. You cannot go before it's your time or it's cheating. I don't know why he said that, but he did. So no suicide.
One thing I can tell you is that suicide won't work. If you're thinking about that, you can just scratch that one off the list because it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. And I'm not exactly sure what that means. Again, I'm no guru, but I know that was one of the things that I was shown is that no, you're not going. There's no short way around. You're not going to die until you fulfill your purpose. So we told me that it's, when I say we told me, that it's not my time and I had to go back. And I threw a spiritual temper tantrum. I said, no, I'm not going back. I didn't even know what back was, right? I didn't know I died. And I said, no, I'm not going back. You got this all wrong. And then once again, I was told it's not your time. You have to go back. But you can come back anytime you want, once you fulfilled your purpose. And then I was sent back to my body.
There are, for example, so-called devout believers who call near-death experiences demonic influences or reflections of the devil. What would you respond to such claims?
There was nothing demonic in my experience. However, I also recognize that there is something out there that isn't good.
Erkennen, dass es so etwas gibt wie das Nicht-Gute.
But this dualism of heaven and hell, God and the devil, well, I think these are the ideas you're talking about. Those ideas are pretty childish. If I believe appropriately, the more mature my faith becomes. When I manage to rescue my faith and transfer it to my adult life, then it will turn into a free belief that can think freely, also via denominational and religious dogmas.
What was shown to me when I died, like the idea of going to hell and suffering for all eternity, and oh, by the way, I love you. That didn't fit. A lot of the things just simply didn't fit, and it caused a great deal of torment. I didn't know something was wrong. It didn't add up. Mm-hmm. So I know other experiencers have described hellish experiences, and I don't know what that's about. I don't know what that's about, but I can tell you that in my experience, there was nothing of the sort, nothing resembling hell. Although, the first part of my experience where I was in the void and I was getting confused and scared and ramping up and getting very frightened, if I had been revived at that point, I would have called that a hellish experience. It was that scary. Maybe that's part of the explanation for it. I don't know. There's a lot I don't know. Again, I'm not a guru, but, something weird happened to me, that's all.
And I also want to add that in the other realm, there's no judgment, because there's nothing to judge. We are all love. We're all pure love. Unconditional love. So there's nothing to judge. And one of the most controversial things in my book, which many people ask me about, is about the fact that I say that there's no judgment, there's no hell, there's no punishment. When you realize that there's nothing to forgive, then there's nothing to punish either. People who commit acts that take them to prison while we're in physical life, yes, we have prisons here to protect us from people who live in so much fear that they can't be trusted not to cause harm. But when they cross over, they themselves understand in that moment of clarity, they themselves understand that everything they did out of fear. They did because they didn't know any better. Now, if you imagine, if you have a child who you have been punishing because they have been not just reckless, but destructive and harmful to other people, harmful to their siblings, so you have had to reprimand them, punish them, scold them. Now imagine if one day, when the child comes to you and says, "Oh my God, I've had an awakening. I understand why I did those things and how stupid it was of me." Are you going to burn them in hell for all of eternity? Of course not.
I'm going to share another one with you. When I was getting ready to come to Sedona to write my book last year, my husband and I were in Oklahoma City visiting his uncle, and his uncle's wife was dying with brain cancer. And the family welcomed us in, but then quietly and quickly ushered me to the side, and they said, "We know how you are. Don't be talking to her about anything religious." And I said, "I won't, I promise. I'll just visit with her." When we got in there, she recognized us and was able to say a few words, but you could tell, their cancer was advanced. They told me that she was terrified. She was afraid that she hadn't been good enough to make it. So I leaned down, I broke my promise, and I whispered to her. And I said, "Do not be afraid, because your angels are going to be with you at that time. Perhaps even some loved ones will come. You will not die alone. You're just going to transition. It's okay. You're more than good enough. It's all right." On the way out here, I received a phone call. I drive out here. That she had passed. I always visit this lovely friend of mine here in Sedona. Her name's Nirup. She is a medium, psychic person, and we just visit. And so I went in to see her one day while I was here. And she said, "What do you want to talk about today?" And I said, "I don't know. How about the book?" And she said, wait. She goes, "There's somebody that's jumping up and down, spiritual realm, all excited about seeing you, wanting to thank you, a female, white hair." She said, "Do you have any idea who that is?" I said, "I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't know. I'm not sure." And she goes, No. This is somebody that's just crossed over." And she said, "You helped her cross over with no fear. She wants you to know that she wants you to tell the people at home, I made it. I was okay. I was good enough." So that was pretty precious to me.
I had miracles happen. I mean, I say I had angels show up. And sometimes those angels were my brothers or my mom. Sometimes it was neighbors. But I felt as if there was always angels from the other side. It's almost like Griffin and Tamara never really were gone. I eventually fell in love again, which was crazy. I mean, it was I had guilt about that. I think I have a guilt complex. I mean, I had this incredible woman come into my life, Tanya. She's my wife now. And I wasn't dating. I was still bereaved. I was still heartbroken. But I began to have feelings for her. And I felt awful. I would go to the graveyard and I would lay on my wife's grave and I was sobbing, saying, well, I was angry. At one point, I'm like, how could you leave me like this? You know, I don't even walk right, and I'm trying to raise our son, and you're in that beautiful place, and how dare you leave me? I mean, I was angry. And it was interesting because as I was pouring out my heart and letting her have it with my words, I felt her. Now, I don't see, but I felt her. I felt as if she came and put her hands on my shoulders behind me. And then she communicated so clearly. She was like, don't berate me for leaving. And she said to me, she said, I loved you enough to leave. And I thought, wow, but that can't be right. That can't, that doesn't make sense. And she communicated, she said, you would not be learning what you're learning. Life would be so different. I would have loved nothing more than to grow old with you and be with you, but that was not the plan. And she laid out like this was a big plan. We made this deal that you were going to come, you were going to have this experience, and that I was going to love you enough to go so that you would have those feelings and have your soul expand in such a way. And none of this really made sense. And so I don't fight fair. And I said, yeah, but I'm having feelings for another woman, And she laughed at me. She said, of course you are. Of course you are. I want you to be happy. I want you to have love. I want you to be with someone. I am not jealous. I'm not upset. I'm not hurt. In fact, she communicated, I sent her your way. You can do whatever you want. You have the choice. But she will teach you unconditional love. And it was so real. Once again, that was so real to me. I could hear the voice in my head, but I could feel it in my heart. I mean, the communication was so clear, and I could feel her there. Even though I didn't feel her physically, I could feel her right there with me. And that was life-changing as well. And I eventually remarried, I mean, Tanya and I continued our relationship, and Spencer embraced her as a mother. Tanya's the hero of the story. I mean, she came in and continued to heal a broken man, because I was broken.
Many people watching this, as you said, have lost loved ones, so they have a fear of death. Often when people have lost loved ones, there's a feeling of alienation and coldness and silence, in which maybe they want to get a message from the loved one, or they want to be reassured that they're okay. You've run into people like this. What do you have to say to people who are undergoing the grief from having lost a loved one?
Oh gosh, that is what a great question. That is something that's really important to me. For one thing, I want to reassure them that the person that they've lost is alive and well, and can't imagine why they would be grieving for them. And here's something else that's, even though I've been through after-death experience, I still grieve when I lose a loved one. Maybe in a little different way. I'm happy for that person, but I still go through the same grief process, and I know what it's like to grieve hard. And so the danger is to minimize it and to while trying to reassure that person that their loved one is alive and well. And it's like walking a tightrope, to not like say, oh, well, the grief doesn't exist, it's just an illusion, and don't worry about it. No, the grief is very real. Mm-hmm. So basically I try to keep it very, very, very quick and allow them to ask me more questions if they want. I just don't, have you ever heard of a near-death experience? I had that happen to me once, and I can assure you that your loved one is indeed alive and well and can't imagine why you're grieving for them. And I'll leave it right there. If they want to ask more questions, then we'll take it from there.
There's a video on YouTube that I recommend you all go look up if you haven't seen it, about there were two sisters who were losing their mother, and before she died, they said, "Now, could you, when you die, will you send us a sign that you're okay?" Then one of them said, "Send us a cardinal." And her mom said, "I'll see what I can do." The day after her memorial service, they all got together to play her favorite card game. And one of them heard a noise at the window. So they went out and came back in carrying a cardinal. It wasn't hurt. It was letting them all pet it. Then they took it outside to release it, and that's the part they videotaped. So this sister, one of the two sisters, throws the cardinal up in the air, and it flies up in the air and then comes back and lands on her shoulder. And they both started crying. It was so sweet, and I was so excited to see this video because I have been hearing about these experiences and having them, and I'm like, somebody caught it on tape. So if you Google sisters receiving a sign and cardinal, you'll be able to watch that video.
What your loved ones would want you to know is that they are happy and they are fine. And your loved ones want you to know that they're still with you and they love you. But the most important thing that your loved ones want you to know is that they want you to be happy again. They want you to find your happiness and your joy again. If there's one message that your loved ones want you to know, is that they don't want you to feel guilty if you find happiness again. No matter what circumstances you've lost your loved ones under, whether it's through illness, accident, sudden death, gradual death, whether it's through suicide, don't feel guilty about anything. Nobody goes before their time. You could not control their death. If there's anything unsaid that you need to say to them, say it. They can hear you. They really can. And many people are confused about how to mourn people's deaths. Do whatever you need to do for your healing. You don't need to do it for them. They really don't need it. Do it for yourself. Do it for your healing. And if you find happiness again, you really need to realize that your life is still a gift and to be lived in joy. Even though they're gone, don't stop living your life. So if you find happiness again, don't feel guilty. Even if you've lost a partner and you find someone else to love again, don't feel guilty. They are very happy for you. Nothing makes them happier than to see you happy. Because, and no matter what their personality was when they were in physical life, remember, they are without all the filters and the layers in the other realm. All they are and all they feel for you is unconditional love. And just remember that always.
Most of us have lost pets. I was 9 years old, and my dog, Skippy, was there. My dog was there. And again, remember, I didn't know I was dead. And he didn't have fur and legs and stuff, but it was Skippy. He was also a floating sphere of awareness. And he absorbed him. We absorbed each other, and we were communicating. There was communication going on, but it was perfect communication. It was like telepathic, and you know, in human communication, there's this thing that happens all the time. I know you know about this, like where you'll say something and I will hear something completely different based on my filters, right? So human communication is flawed, but that communication there was perfect. And Skippy and I were talking to each other. It was, I love you, I love you. Oh, Skippy, I love you. Where are we? What happened? How did we get? You know, it was kind of going on and on like that. And so here's the headline. Your loved ones, your pets, they're there. They're still there. And you'll see them again.
When someone approaches me and asks me, do you believe that we have many lives? I don't know. I can't tell you that for sure. It makes a lot of sense. I don't think I can learn everything in one lifetime. But if you do, I think the most important life that we're to be concentrating on is this life, this journey, this day, this time. This is what we're supposed to be about.
And I was sitting on the ground and having a little chit chat with Christ. And Jesus was sitting on this rock, and again, it's not something I talked about for a long time because it seems, first of all, very presumptuous, pretentious, but in addition to that, very personal. It was it was my thing. When I first started telling about my experiences to people, like I'm sure many of you, you know, there's sort of this mixed bag. I had been given a mandate to share my experiences, and I was willing to say yes, sort of. But I didn't want to share everything because I wanted something just for me. And I've talked to many, many people. I've listened to probably 400 or 500 people's near-death experiences now, and it's interesting because that's a very common experience for people. They don't want to share it with anyone because it's sort of their special little experience, their special connection. So I didn't really talk about it much, but I had this conversation, again, for what seemed like many hours with Christ, and we did talk more about some of the things I still had to do. We talked about this mandate to share my experiences, which it's not something I ever would have signed up for. You know, it's sort of like, well, why do I have to do that? I don't like it. I'm not good at it. You're wrong. But here I am, of course. And we also talked about, again, my future son's death. And during that conversation, yet again, came back to the very original experience during my life review. And again, talked about this transformation from a hope or a faith that the promises of God are true to an absolute trust. Because if you make that transformation, it is absolutely life-changing. It's an absolute game changer. Because if you come to a point when you don't just say, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's all true. But if you actually come to a point where you say, I know that God is real and present. I know that He loves me more than I can appreciate. And I know that God has a plan for my life that is one of hope. Then it changes the way you experience events. It changes the way you experience every moment of every day. So we did talk more about that. And then I was back in my hospital bed. And I pushed my nurse's button and said, I want to know what drugs I'm getting. Because I want more of those. And what I was told then, and indeed after the fact, I went back and I've gone through all my medical records, and I wasn't getting anything. I wasn't getting anything other than antibiotics. And early on, I'd been giving steroids. And so I wasn't receiving any drug that would create a hallucination. And so then after the first couple weeks, then I started to be less in the spiritual world, more in this world. Then I did start having pain, plenty of it, and had multiple surgeries, many, many months of rehab. And during those many months of rehab, I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to figure out what it was that had happened to me. Maybe if I'd known about this group then, it would have saved me some time. But at the time, I went through all my medical records, I went through all the data I could, I listened to what everyone had to say who had been at the river, in the emergency room, in the hospital. I collected as much data as I possibly could. And then also did research. I looked at the idea of hallucinations, and that was easy to discount that. Because of course hallucinations or dreams are very short-lived. First of all, it's a very different quality of experience. It's a very different memory. As you all know, and as every person who's ever told me their story would say, I remember the details of my experience as accurately and precisely as today as I did when it was happening. And I think it's as though we describe the event in real time. It's a present tense for us. It's not just recalling a memory. I mean, I remember big events in my life pretty well. But if I describe them year after year, 50 years into the future, well, the details will probably change a little bit. But near-death experiences, as you know, are different. The details don't change. It's a different quality of experience. So then I thought, okay, well, let's look into the physiologic effect of a dying brain. What does DMT do? What is the process? Because that's a reasonable explanation. And so I looked at the research, and I think that it's a handy explanation for people who have hypoxia of maybe a couple of minutes. And so I look at the timetable of my experience, and the people who resuscitated me, and keep in mind that this is what they do. They are professionals. They're very in tune with time. They would say I was without oxygen for 30 minutes. And within that 30 minutes were 7 minutes or so of time that they didn't realize I was gone. Because usually if you have a problem in a boat, either you see the boat or the kayaker, but not both are missing. So it took them about 7 minutes or so to figure out we were gone. Took them another 7 minutes or so to figure out where we must be. Because as I said earlier, I was under 8 or 10 feet of water, and they couldn't really figure out where I was. Once they figured out where I must be, they started to watch, because obviously time is very important when you're talking about rescue versus recovery. So they started watching from the moment they started the watch to the moment they began CPR was 15 minutes. So I tend to focus on the 15 minutes because that's the shortest objective measure of time without oxygen. And when you look at the physiology of a dying brain, you realize, and I won't get into the details, but basically by 15 minutes, it's over. I wasn't young, the water wasn't cold, there weren't other mitigating factors. By 15 minutes, survival is pretty unlikely. And survival without significant brain damage is really unheard of. And I actually was tested. My kids probably disagree with the outcome, but I did not have apparent brain damage. And so at the end of many months of really data collection and contemplation, and also spending a lot of time meeting with ministers, clergy, because I wanted to know, how do I reconcile my experience with what I had grown up thinking. And I spent many, many months doing that, and at the end had to come to the conclusion that no, what I experienced was real, was true, just as all of you who have had an experience had to come to that conclusion. Because the world in general will tell you it's not real, and it's not true, and there must be some other explanation. But as you know, and as I know, there isn't a different explanation. And I tried. I tried to come up with a different explanation, partly because I didn't really want the things I had been told to be true. But in the end, I had to conclude that it was true. And so I spent a number of years really thinking about, okay, how do I move forward with this? I didn't want to share my experience with other people because I didn't have time. I didn't have the inclination. I didn't know how to do that. Some of the things I'd been told sort of came to fruition relatively quickly. And then I was also left with this knowledge that my son was going to die. And I have been asked many times, how could you get out of bed with that knowledge? And the answer is very simple, and it comes back again to having made this transformation from hope or faith in the promises of God to a trust. Because if indeed I trust that there is a plan for each person's life that's one of hope, then the same would be true of my son's life. And I woke up every day knowing that, first of all, the plan could change. And certainly I hoped each day that the plan would change. But I also woke up each day knowing that if the plan for his life did not change, that there would be incredible hope and beauty that came not only out of my son's life, but out of his death. In addition to which, if you truly believe that there is life after death, then it changes your experience of death. Because, we have work to do here, but our time here is this incredible opportunity that's so short. And then we transition on, and death is not the final word. And so I spent 10 years sort of in this kind of state of limbo. I really didn't want to do much about it. And I came up with all these reasons why I didn't need to share my experiences with other people. Some of which I feel were legitimate. And I didn't want my kids to know that I didn't want to come back. And I think that that's an important part of almost everyone's near-death experience. None of us want to come back. And so I had good excuses for not doing it. But eventually, I was almost physically picked up out of bed, put on the ground, and it was as though God said, okay, today is the day that you are going to say yes. And I have often said that that's the second day in my life when things changed radically, because on that day I did say yes. And that's an important part of it. It's easy to give lip service to trusting, and yes, I'm listening to where God's leading, but it's very different, and it's a very different thing to say yes. I find that most of us are much happier to say no. Because God leads us places where we may not want to go or don't think that we can go. I mean, rarely is it within our comfort zone. You know, God doesn't usually say, hey, you know what? You're doing great. You're so happy in what you're doing. Keep doing it. Because none of us grow or change or learn anything when we're in the status quo. We learn, we grow, we change, we develop when we're stressed in whatever way. We're given all sorts of challenges. And so the second day my life changed was when I got it. I said, okay, yes. I will listen and I will say yes. So I got up, and over the course of about a week, I wrote the manuscript for this book. And the day I finished it, the day I hit the save button, and I thought, oh, it's done. I mean, this was 10 years of feeling guilty that, oh my gosh, I have to do this, and I don't want to do it, and oh my gosh, the elation, the lightness of being when I finished it was indescribable. Allowed me to, again, remember everything that had been told to me and recall the entire process and all the discussions about trust. Because what it really required was trust. And what it really required later on was the trust to say, here is my son. He's your son. And I will tell you that it is that transformation that motivates me to talk to people. Because I believe that is truly the absolute key to living a life filled with joy, no matter what the circumstances. You know, happiness is like love. It's an emotion. Sometimes you're really happy, sometimes you're sad. You know, sometimes I really love my husband, and sometimes I want to kill him. You know, I mean, it's an emotion, and emotions are based on circumstance. But joy is a very different thing. And I believe it's that transformation from hope or faith that the promises of God are true to an absolute trust that they're true that changes everything. And trust, I believe, is a choice. It is a decision. Hope and faith, it's not really, I don't really think that's a choice. I mean, you hear my story, you hear other people's stories, and you kind of hope it's true. I mean, maybe you go through life and you sort of see things happen and you have faith that, yeah, okay, I'm pretty sure it's true. But then something happens and your faith is shaken because you're saying, well, why? Why did my brother-in-law die as a young man? And so then you say, well, I'm pretty angry. I'm like, why did that happen? But when your faith is shaken, I would say that it's because you've never made that transformation. You know, we're all going to die, obviously, and we are all going to suffer loss. We are all going to suffer challenge. And while I don't ask for more challenges, I mean, I don't want more. And I always hate to say this out loud, but I kind of embrace challenges because I am grateful for those challenges, because I am grateful for the way those challenges are changing me and deepening whatever aspect is important at that time, whether it's humility, compassion, and on down the list. And I can be grateful because of that trust. And I absolutely believe that everyone is able to make that transformation. If you've had a near-death experience, it's a lot easier because you already have that absolute understanding that life is not the final word. But I absolutely believe that anyone can make that transformation, but it takes effort. I think it takes collecting data. And it's a matter of usually writing things down. I mean, maybe other people have better memories than I do, but usually it's writing things down and it's looking retrospectively at events in your life and how you came to those events. It's looking at things in your life that maybe your knee-jerk response is, oh, that was terrible. But then looking at it differently and trying to look at the incredible things that came out of that event. In 1,000 years, I would never have looked at my parents' divorce and thought, oh, hey, this is gonna be great. I was a young teenager. It was devastating. And at the time, I thought God was, well, I won't use the language that I used at the time, but I was angry. I was a very angry person because it didn't fall in line with what I thought should happen. And it took many years for me to then look back at that event and be so incredibly grateful. Because without that, my stepfather wouldn't have come into my life. And he to date, don't tell my husband, but he to date has been the greatest influence on my life of any human being. And so you can look back at your life and you can look at events like that. And they occur in every person's life. You can look at the way God has led you. You can look at the way God has loved you. You can look at the miracles that have occurred. And I absolutely believe miracles occur in every person's life. It's a matter of whether we acknowledge them. Where every time you find yourself going, oh, that's weird, you should flip it and say, huh, is it weird or is it a miracle? I mean, there's so many synchronous events that occur, and we can either look up and notice them or not, and it's a choice. And I believe you have to collect all that data, and it has to be in your own life. You can't take my life or anyone else's life, because that's external. And you can say, oh, that's really nice. You could walk out of here today and say, well, yeah, I believe her because some of it was sort of like my experience. But what I would really hope is you walk out and you say, well, I don't believe her. Because I would hope that you say, well, I'm gonna see if that's really true. And spend the next 6 months actually writing things down and thinking about it. Because I believe that at the end of that data collection, you will come to the same conclusion for yourself that I have in my life, which is, yeah, there's enough evidence that I'm willing to make a decision to trust. And the question I have, with spiritual stuff, we all want more and more proof. I mean, there are scientific studies now, but no one can prove spiritual things. Just like you can't prove cold. Cold is really just, cold. Cold is the absence of heat. You can't prove cold. You can't, I don't believe, ever prove spiritual things. And if you could, well, it sort of defeats one of the powerful aspects of choosing to believe. But I believe that you can collect the data and you make a choice. And then that is a daily choice. You wake up every day and you say, yes, I trust. I choose to trust. And I believe that you, like I, will then wake up every day. I wake up with the expectation of seeing God's love, seeing God's presence. I wake up with the expectation of seeing miracles in the world. And I do. I think many of you do. I think many of you are, this is a very different group. We are a very different group of people than the usual group of people. I mean, some of you see a lot of things. But I absolutely think that is the absolutely essential action to take, decision to make, in order to truly transform your life into one of hope, healing, and the purpose of this conference. And I could go on and on.
And I will tell you that trust for me is sort of faith in action. And I will tell you what it looks like in my life. First of all, because of trust, I'm free. I am free from all bondage to my past. I don't feel guilt. I don't feel remorse, regret for anything I've done or not done. Because I trust that God knows me completely and knows my story, knows my failings. And in that knowledge, through grace, feels nothing but compassion for me. And I also know that I would feel nothing but compassion for people in my past, because if I knew their true story, I too would feel nothing but compassion for them. And so I am free from bitterness, hate, anger, even minor irritation that people have caused me. And I don't have worry or anxiety about my future, because I trust that God has a plan for my life that is one of hope. And I'm certainly not afraid of death. I trust, and actually I will claim to know, that there really is life after death, heaven, whatever you want to call it. And I actually believe that it is the very reality of that heaven that brings context and meaning and purpose to my own life.
A week later, a guy came in that I knew, and he said, I heard about your experience. I said, yeah, it happened, you know. He said, I heard that you were, you know, you had a near-death experience and that you were out for about an hour. And I said, yeah, that's true. And he said, well, the same thing happened to me. And I said, and then I asked him what the meaning of life was. And he says, oh, that's easy. It's all about love.